Good ambiences or soundscapes are really helpful tools in audio storytelling. With an ambience, you can tell the listener a lot without saying a single word. A good soundscape will provide information to the listener about the location in which your story is unfolding. It will help set the scene so that the listeners start associating on their own rather than being told what to think and envision, resulting in a much more engaging experience for the listener. Here is an example of a good immersive soundscape. Close your eyes and let your creativity tell you the story of this place. What images comes up and what ideas are you left with about this location? The soundscape you just heard was of course recorded with the Nomono Sound Capsule. And in the rest of this video, I'm going to show you how I created it. First, you have to pick a good spot for the space recorder. It is meant to capture the sort of generic vibe of the space, the perspective that you want the listeners to have. Then you use the stellar mics, or the spot mics if you will, to capture specific sounds within that location. For example, water dripping on a tarp, wind rustling the leaves of trees, or whatever else you find interesting in the location. You have 4 mics, so make sure that you use them. The key is to find sounds that help convey the story that you're trying to tell to the listener. Once you've placed all your microphones, hit record and practice being patient for about 10 minutes or so. But remember, the longer your recording is, the more options you have in post. For example, there can be cars passing by, people talking, planes overhead, or other things that you don't want in your soundscape. So make sure that you record long enough to find good, clean stretches across all your tracks in post. Speaking of post, soundscape recordings will not need enhancement. So make sure you download the clean, original, unprocessed tracks from the cloud. Now that we have our recordings, it's time to put them together into an immersive soundscape, mixing in ambisonics. So let's head on to DaVinci Resolve and we'll put this mix together. Before we start editing our ambience or our soundscape, we need to do some housekeeping here in DaVinci. First of all, let's import our files. Then we need to tell DaVinci Resolve that we also have an ambisonics first order file in here so that it understands what kind of format it is. So now when you drag your files onto the timeline, it will automatically create ambisonics track for the ambisonics ambience, and for the mono tracks or the lav mics, it just makes mono tracks, and that's exactly what we want. Then we need to set up our routing structure. We need to let DaVinci Resolve know what kind of format we are working in, which is going to be third order ambisonics. We do that by setting up a third order ambisonics bus. And if you're wondering what happens to a first order ambisonics file that goes through a third order ambisonics bus, it just fills the first 4 channels and it behaves exactly like it should. Same goes for second order ambisonics. As long as the order of the output is higher than the order of the files you're working with, you're good. Then we need to make sure that all the tracks are outputted to the correct bus. And we do that over here in the bus output. And then you just select 3OA for all of them. Then we need to make sure that we're listening to the correct bus. We can switch that up here. And we also want to listen binaurally since I'm using headphones. But if you only have speakers, you could select the 2.0 for a stereo setup, or a 7.1 if you have a 7.1 studio available. You can select sort of that listening format or the monitoring format here. When all that is done, we can start editing. First, I just like to go through and make sure that the tracks are at a decent listening level. Then I'll go through and select passes for each track that I want to use, making sure that I can't hear any cars or people or other things that I don't want in there. And then it's finally time to start editing the positioning of the objects. So I go through one by one and sort of think, where does this seem like it's coming from? Like, where does it make sense to place this sort of sound? So for example, the gushing sound, it sounds like a water outlet close to ground level. So it makes sense to put it a little bit below the listening position. Rain on a tarp feels like it could be a roof of some kind, so I'm going to place that up high, above me. And obviously, this is something that you can just play around with until you find what works for you. As long as the sounds you're using and the positioning of them is helping you tell your story in some way, shape, or form, then you should be good. And you can take this so far. For example, you can use sounds that are more dark. A good example for an ominous sound would be like a crow. Quack, quack, quack. There's always a crow if something scary is going to happen. So, and a kind of happy-go-lucky kind of sound that makes you feel a bit more happy would be like the morning chorus of birds. You know, that makes you think of spring and sunshine. When you start thinking about sound like that, it can really help you drive your story and your storytelling through the use of sounds. So with that said, go out there and be creative, make some crazy soundscapes, and if you want to show me what you've made, I would love to hear it.